Welcome to Art Share, the podcast for artists by artists, with your hosts, Brigid Ashwood, Ash Evans, and Mary Layton.
Hello and welcome back to the second episode of Art Share Podcast in our new season after our long hiatus. Thanks so much for being with us. I'm Brigid Ashwood. We have Ash Evans with us and Mary Layton, which you know because we have a new intro, which I keep forgetting that we have a new intro at the beginning of our show. Sorry, I'm just getting used to that. I'm still getting into the swing of things. So let's see. So today our topic, one that I think we're kind of all chomping at the bit to discuss, is the old, well, not that old because it hasn't been around that long, the digital versus traditional debate, which is only about as old as Photoshop. Alrighty, so let's see. Who wants to go first? So many talking points here. Have the duck. I'm ready. And Ash has her duck at the ready. Well, let's see. Mary, you paint digitally, but probably more traditionally than you do digitally.
I do, yeah. Mainly what I paint is watercolors. I also do pen and ink pencil. But I do like to use digital every now and then. Just depends on how I feel, really. But the thing is, I pretty much use digital tools the same way I use traditional tools. It's, the stylus is just the same as a paintbrush. Mm-hmm. The screen's a palette, or your canvas. Mm-hmm. And I use pretty much the same way. I think, the whole thing with anytime there's a new technique, and this goes back to the old masters, mm-hmm. somebody doesn't like it. Someone mm-hmm. isn't going to like it. You can't do it that way. That's not real art. And that's what we hear a lot with this debate between traditional versus digital.
That's so true. Watercolor and pastels weren't allowed into the Royal Academy of Arts for ages, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what we go through. And it's kind of been my experience that people who are most vocal about how horrible digital is and that it's not real art tend to be people who have never even opened up a digital painting program to even see what it's about.
Yes.
They just don't want to have anything to do with it. It's something new and therefore it's not valid.
Right.
And I think that's an unfortunate way of thinking, really.
Yeah. I agree. And Ash is holding up her duck. I agree. And I think a few years ago, I remember seeing in a magazine a traditional illustrator who I'd always respected her work make some really snide, disparaging comments about digital art that I found really shocking and ignorant. It was really disappointing because I think that's probably one of the problems with digital art is that people just don't understand and they don't, because first of all, there's digital art and then there's digital painting. And I know I am guilty of using both terms, but I tend to try to say digital painting when I describe what I do. Myself, I was classically trained with very traditional mediums. I mean, my favorite medium was tempera grassa, egg tempera. Tempera grassa is just egg tempera, but with oil mixed in, and oil paints, and were all my favorite mediums. But for me, making the move to digital was, I don't want to exaggerate, but life-changing in a sense, because I had developed a chemical allergy to all the ingredients I was using, and just the smell of linseed could trigger off terrible headaches and skin rashes in me. I mean, seriously, I couldn't work. And I have a background in graphic design. So I was very familiar with using Photoshop for my, for clients and stuff, but really with photo manipulation. And I think that's part of the disconnect, is that I think that with internet culture and, shoots, which is slang for Photoshop, people taking Donald Trump's head and sticking it on a turd, that's like Photoshop, and you can do digital art and you can digitally paint in Photoshop. Of course you can. But I think that that's what people tend to think of, is they think of trickery, because when we say something's been, quote, Photoshopped, right? We mean tricked. We've been tricked. We've been manipulated somehow visually with that. So I think that's part of the problem, because there's as many different ways to work digitally as there are to work traditionally. And then for me, when my digital painting really took off, it clicked for me, was when I found Corel Painter, and I saw that it mimicked, all these different medias. And the oil pastel brushes in Corel Painter are my absolute favorite, but there's, tons of different ones in there. Like literally every medium is in there, can be mimicked. And the traditional techniques that you use of transparent glazes over top of other transparent glazes, you can mimic that in Corel Painter. And the funny thing to me is that most of my fans cannot tell which of my works are digital and which are oils. Sorry, Ash, before, because I could just keep going. So let's continue before I just run on.
Well, I mean, I do multiple things also, but I gravitate more towards digital because a lot of the work I do sometimes needs to be edited and quickly. And it's a lot easier to change a color, flip a layer, do other things. It's a tool. And here's the thing about any artworks. I see a lot of artists, they think that it's all, oh, this artist is fabulous because they use Winsor Newton watercolors, or this artist is fabulous because they have this Photoshop brush. What brush are you using? And it's not that. I mean, a genuinely amazing artist can make things out of Sharpies on the side of a car, and it's going to be fabulous. I mean, there's talent behind the tools. Right. And I say that digital art, it's a tool. I don't really even believe at this point that when we're submitting to juries that we should have to tell them what medium we're using, because how is that valid in the production of the art? I have issues with that. I have issues with artists that say that they hand paint everything the traditional way.
Oh, I hate that, because I tell you what, I have yet to paint anything with my foot or my butt.
Or my butt. I mean, seriously.
I use my ass.
Bless the people that do because they have to. I mean, there are a million painters that paint with their mouth because they're paralyzed and things like that. But it's a dig, and it's cheap. Yeah. And it deepens them. And it was a big artist that said that, and they said it in an interview, and I was absolutely disgusted with them because, like Mary said, they had never tried it. Right. They said that it was hand painted the traditional way. I use my hands. And here's the thing. Yeah. Acrylic paints wouldn't be considered traditional by old masters. It's plastic pigments you bought at Dick Blick, okay? You don't see Da Vinci rolling up to Dick Blick and getting paint and everything. Like, he would be disgusted by those people. I mean, traditional, it's a very big umbrella term. I mean, it makes me so angry when an artist does stuff like that. And it's just, I think it comes from a place of insecurity, frankly. You shouldn't have to devalue a medium to build yourself up in yours. Right. You should be confident in your own equipment or whatever. So I think it's gross. I don't like that shows will discriminate against digital artists because their work isn't as valuable. I don't like it at shows when people are like, oh, what medium is this? And then they're kind of like disappointed when they find out it's digital because they loved it like 2 seconds ago. Right. Or they're like, oh, well, I thought it's watercolor. And I've gotten to the point where I asked them and I said, well, if it was watercolor, would you be fine with it? I mean, so clearly you like it. And they're like, oh, yeah, I just thought it was, like real. Well, it's not fictitious. It didn't come out of my butt. I know, right? And it takes as much or more work. It's not, in the execution, in the learning of the program, in things like that. And I'm sure for a lot of us, it starts with an actual sketch. I mean, you can sketch on a piece of paper and then scan it into your computer and then paint over it. So
yes, as a matter of fact, and that's something, I think that's, you've touched on something there, because the reasons that people don't like it is because they have this idea that it's a trick. They think that they know how you made it, and it involved, even if they can't say exactly how, it must have involved tricks somehow. Well, I got news for you. First of all, I don't believe in tricks or cheats when it comes to art, okay? I don't think that artists should lie about their techniques, okay? But I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to say, I don't want to share my techniques. That's fine, okay? But I don't think you should lie and say something that's absolutely, completely incorrect. And I have actually seen that happen. But I got to tell you, folks, there are ways to cheat and trick with using just traditional art, completely traditional work, okay? Although there's also people I've seen using kind of a mix of digital and traditional, and then passing off the finished product as completely traditional. That's kind of interesting. But there's, since the beginning of time, artists have used techniques to help them improve their skills or to improve realism in the work. I mean, who was it? David Hockney did all that research about the camera obscura and the history of art, and it's the Dutch masters, so Google it. And it was Ingres, right, who used, there was a Kickstarter for this little like portable camera thing, and I can't remember what it's called, and I freaking bought it and I have one. And they showed how Ingres used this when he was, if I'm saying Ingres's name right, I hope I am, and he would use it and to do these incredible like line drawings of these subjects live. But he was literally, this little camera and mirror and lens were taking the subject from across the room and projecting it in a sense so that he could see it on his paper. And people have, artists have been doing that since the beginning, because, it's, I always liken it to, in school, you're taught to memorize your multiplication tables, right? And you have to do that. And then once you've done that, they hand you a calculator. Okay. And I think the same thing is true with artists. You really do need to pay your dues and learn the foundation skills and learn how to draw from life and your perspective and proportion and get all that right. And then after that, then your tools are there to speed up your production time. And that said, though, with digital, when people tell me, oh, you're so lucky that you work digitally because it goes so much faster, I really kind of take exception to that these days. I think that what digital has done for me is I've always worked fast. So sorry, but I think in a sense it makes me take longer because there's so much more I can do. I can push myself further. And so I'll take longer on a piece than I think I would traditionally, because traditionally I just get so annoyed and frustrated with the effect that the pigments have on me, the headache and the backache from leaning over my table and all that stuff, that, I speed it up, and I don't think I think my quality overall was suffering in the long run. But then there's artists I've seen too, and I've done this myself, and I've seen more of this, is traditional artists that are working with digital and are kind of doing an in-between. And they'll take, and paint like an underpainting digitally and then print it out on watercolor paper or canvas and prepare it and then finish it in oils or acrylics. And I've done that.
I've done that myself too.
That's fantastic, because one thing that does is that it solves the problem of there not being a quote original to sell. Okay. I love that. And also there are certain things that are harder to mimic, digitally. Not a lot. The programs are getting better all the time. But for me, like the biggest one, I don't know about you, Ash, because you do a lot of fur, so maybe, is the heavily loaded, long, fine brush where you get the really thick, the initial
like the
stroke,
taper,
and then the great, the really fine taper off. That's really, like, I'll usually have to play with that line, on 3 or 4 strokes in the computer, as opposed to just one pass of the brush with a properly loaded brush.
Right.
Yeah,
I deal with that.
That thick thin line. Yeah.
all I do all day is literally I paint fur most of the day, and most of the time it's black fur, so it's just even better.
Black fur all day long.
All fur all day long. And of course, like I have a cat here, so I'm being covered in fur. It's constantly fur. But with digital, I've done the underpainting digitally. I didn't have time. It was funny. It was for Dragon Con. And the funny thing about it is you get in, they let you know when you get to the jury, and you have until like some point in the summer, and you have to tell them every single piece you're going to have in the show and the dimensions. And this is weeks out from like when it is. And most artists don't have everything done by then. So you kind of like fudge it and say, oh, well, yeah, I'm going to have all these pieces and it's this, but you have to tell them ahead of time. As it was creeping closer, because I'm also, I have to fill orders and do other things. Dragon Con isn't my whole year. I was like, I'm never going to get this done like the way I wanted it to. So I was like, I'm just going to do the base paint in Painter. I printed it out on watercolor. I mounted it to a wood panel and then covered it in clear gesso and went from there. And it's just faster. There's no drying time with digital. There's no weight. There's no chemical waste. I mean, a lot of people don't think about the environmental implications of traditional art mediums as they're starting to phase cadmiums, especially out of the supplies. They're still in the water, in the ground systems. We know the effects of these cadmium colors on people and on the environment. People, not everyone, I'm sure, disposes of like their turpentine and things the way that they're really supposed to. So I'm sure it's ending up in watershed systems and things like that. So, I mean, this is really a more sustainable, greener way to function moving forward in the future. And that's something that it's funny that the other environmental people haven't kind of glommed onto.
Right.
Because, some artists, it's recycled paper and that's fantastic. I'm glad you're making an effort, but you're still dumping all that poison down your drain.
That's true. Yeah.
But, I mean, you've had toxicity issues with yourself. There's many, many, many of my art supplies. I'm like looking around that say that, they call us birth defects. You can't use them when you're pregnant. You can't do this. You can't do that.
When we moved cross country, I had to take half my studio, pack it up in a box, and keep it in the cab of the car that we were driving under air conditioned control. I couldn't have it shipped in the
move to another country.
Right. Exactly.
With all that crap.
You probably had to carry. Well, would they let you carry it on? No.
Oh my God. Some of it just had to be disposed of.
Right.
Some of it I couldn't even buy legally in the UK, which annoyed me to no end. Some of it I just kind of brought anyway, in a bag or whatever. It was a nightmare. I mean, it was an absolute nightmare. And if you travel a lot, and of course, on the other side, I had people at Heathrow detain me because they thought my Cintiq was a bomb. And so, I mean, honestly, they made me pull out the entire thing and my laptop and set all of it up and show them that it was a thing because they thought it was some kind of device.
Yeah.
Which London, you would think there had been another designer or artist or someone that would have passed through, but then they wanted to check it on the plane and I'm like, no. I said,
no way.
This was a very expensive piece of equipment, and it's if the laptop's allowed on the plane, then this is too.
Right.
But I just, that's something that isn't generally touched upon is the environmental issues, the health issues that can come from it. And of course, I'm not decrying it. I have those things. I use them too. But it may be your high horse gets a little bit lower when you think about that. For just 5 minutes with your hand painted the traditional way thing that, you're doing.
Well, that's just it. We all started out as traditional media artists, so we're not knocking that at all. I'm just saying that, you know, my training with traditional media is what allowed me to move into digital painting, you know, with a little more ease. But even so, it was like learning any other medium. You know, there's a real curve in the beginning where everything just looks like crap because you don't know your way around the little idiosyncrasies of this particular.
Overuse the blur tool. Like, I feel like smudge and blur are the two things that new digital artists.
Oh, I know. We'll talk about that. Right. Don't be afraid of crisp edges, people, please.
Well, you got me to stop with that because that's what I would do. I mean, I know I have pieces that were like smudged and blurred to.
It's scary. I think digital at first can be scary. I think especially if you're starting out in Photoshop to paint. Okay, because that hard edge brush in Photoshop can be so intimidating. Right? It's like, oh my God, look at the edge of that. It's so
like a Sharpie.
And right, and then when you're using traditional media, you just don't tend to see that much. You don't get a natural hard edge like that unless you're using high contrast or like a mask or something like that. I mean, there whether you are consciously aware of it or not, there's a bit of a bleed with all the media so that it's just fuzzing that line just a tad. But then when you get into Photoshop and you use the standard default hard edge brush, and it's intimidating. So then people will go the other direction and just, you know, soften it the hell out way too much. And so then you've got something that looks, the first efforts remind me very much of when I would train new students on airbrush, you know, like, look, I painted this picture. This literally these same problems with airbrush students. They're just so, that fuzzy edge is much safer mentally for some reason. But that's the great thing about Corel Painter. So for me, I was never able to paint in Photoshop. Just didn't feel natural to me for whatever reason. And Corel got me into computer graphics at all, because I started with Corel back with Corel Draw in the early 90s. Just realizing, I'm like, wait, how old am I? Yeah, the early 90s, because I think at that time, kind of the way it went was Photoshop was for Macs at that time, and Corel was the equivalent for PC. And that is what the sign company used, the sign industry, because they would use the vectors in Corel Draw to send instructions to their machines that would then do the vinyl cutting and all the different things, way back when all that stuff was much bigger and more industrial and much more expensive. And now people have, you know, 3D printers in their houses. So I loved Corel from way back then. And before I ever had Photoshop, I had Corel Photo Paint and loved it. And so then when Corel Painter came out, I was like, oh, I know this company. I know this will be awesome. I'm so excited. And that they were mimicking traditional media was a godsend, because really in Photoshop, you have to use like special image capture sort of brushes to mimic that. The settings aren't as flexible as they are in Painter. So really anything that you're doing traditionally, you can do digitally just about. There's a few, maybe not gold leaf. I mean, you can still do it. It's just going to be a different process. You can still do it.
Just gold leaf the print afterwards.
Yeah.
Just let's, you know.
How I do it is I have like different textures and scans that I use, and then I'll just put them in for that effect or whatever. But yeah, so there's a few things, you know, that are a little more challenging. But
I think of like a couple that I could, maybe some of like the gel mediums.
But I spend more time on the fun stuff. I think that's what I love about digital, because this year I tried to go back and do a new series of like little fantasy paintings in watercolor, and I did the sketch in Painter. And then I printed it out and redrew it in graphite on my substrate. And I started painting with watercolors, and I was not having fun. I just was not having fun because I was having to make all the little corrections, that happen. Okay. I think I've gotten addicted to the undo button. So I was, instead of just going undo, I was having to make, constantly correct my painting, which there was a time when that was part of my process and I probably didn't even notice and I didn't mind. Well, now I mind. I'd rather work smarter, not harder. So I spend more time with the parts that I love about painting when I paint traditionally. If I'm painting a portrait, and most portrait artists know that towards the end of a painting, the piece can sometimes travel. Their face or their expression can travel, and you never really intended it for it to. Well, guess what? Just a few little, manipulations, and I can pop it right back where it was supposed to be. I can fix it from the journey it took that I didn't want it to take.
I find myself taking more risks digitally also, because you're not worrying about how expensive the paper is. You're not worrying about, okay, there's no undo for this. And I think that actually helped me get to the next level of art for me, because part of it was intimidation and the fear of a mistake. And that's just removed in the digital process, because you could do it on another layer, or you could undo it, or you could save a different version. I mean, you could just keep going. And another great thing is eventually the pigment load on a substrate will hit a point where that's it. There is no more. You're done. I mean, that's basically how I used to be done. Mm-hmm. You were one step away from mud.
Right.
You knew it. So you had to, done. Right. In digital, I mean, you could paint on one piece every day for the rest of your life if you really wanted to. Mm-hmm. And I think that's pretty awesome.
That's where I get in trouble. Yeah, that's why I say a lot of times it takes me longer. It's because I'm just like, the possibilities,
Yeah. You don't have to wait for it to dry. You don't have to there's no, and at the same time, there's no stepping back. That's the one thing I did like with traditional work, was when it had to sit and dry. You don't just stare at it and wait for paint to dry. You go do something else. Then you come back to it with a new perspective, where digital, I can sit down in front of my screen for 16 hours and not move.
Yeah.
I won't even peek. Like, that's it.
Healthy. That's not advisable.
No, that's not good. That's what I do. I get obsessed. So it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, everything has its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
It's just the knocking of it in general is obnoxious to me.
Yeah.
And especially the people who haven't tried it, like Mary said, remember, like, your mom would be like, try broccoli. And you're like, I don't like it.
I mean, that is pretty.
You don't like it. You haven't tried it.
Yeah, and don't assume. You should never assume when you see. Frankly, here's my message: you should never assume when you see any art, traditional or digital, that you know how it was made because they told you the media that it was made in. Because I'm telling you, there are ways to fake and cheat traditional work as well. Okay. Even though I don't like the words fake. To me, faking or cheating is when the artist lies. Okay. And lying doesn't mean that they keep their techniques to themselves. That's their right.
But it's calling it oil painting, a digital painting and oil painting. That's a lie.
That's a lie. Yes. Printing out a photograph very lightly onto a piece of paper and then color penciling over it and saying that you did it from scratch and there was, lying about it having a photograph printed on it. That's a lie. That's not, don't lie. Just say,
could have called it mixed media and that would have been the end of it.
And you know what? Right. Mixed media. Exactly. Artists all want to be coy, because the truth is sometimes people who know nothing of our industry will judge. And so we don't want to be judged. So we might be coy. And then I can understand that might be tempting to then lie, but don't lie. That hurts everybody, shoot, what else I think? Oh, but when you said, like, when a substrate gets loaded, colored pencil, forget about it. You've got like hardly any time when you're working with Prismacolors before that paper is just going to be fully loaded, and it's just not going to. And that's when you get there with the paint thinners and sandpaper, and you're trying to like whack it back so that you
rubbing
can
alcohol,
and you're out of luck.
So in a prayer, there's so many things. and then you get a hole in the piece, and then you're screaming, and you're, you're gluing a patch of paper to the back of it, and then nobody needs that in their life.
No, right. I can't with that anymore. I can't have it. And also I'm really sick of painting, of repetition in my painting. If I don't have to paint it again, I don't want to. I want to move on. I want to move forward. So, if I can,
jewels, encrusted bodice.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, right. Like one of the pieces I'm working on now with Corel Painter. Oh my God. God bless the mirror function. Oh my God. That's why all the new pieces since I went digital, like my costume design is so much better than it was, because I couldn't be bothered, because I wanted to just do what I found was the fun parts of painting. And so I had a lot of nudes because I was like, oh, can't be bothered with all this. Well, now I have beautiful costume design, and I use the mirror function to design, this beautiful floral or damask work to go on the front of the bodice of the fairy with the dragon or whatever. And it's just easy to play, to sketch and play with it. And then whatever I'm drawing on this side, Corel does it on the other side. Bam! Half the work, like, duh.
Well, the not work stuff if you're using, like a triple thing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll do a tutorial about the knot work. Yeah, I use it for all the time too, because it's awesome. But again, we had another conversation where Mary did not get to say much because Ash and I have run-of-the-mouth disease. So
I need to learn to just budge in and.
We let you go first. That was
that's true. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah,
we're gonna just make Mary talk like the first.
We need like a hand signal or something. We need like a.
Yeah. I could just sit here and point at myself. Me.
Nice.
Mary's the arm candy. That's what it is.
There you go. Candy. Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I guess just to recap, we're not knocking traditional media or traditional artists by any means, because that's what we were first and foremost. And I still am. I still work traditionally.
They started it. No, I'm just kidding.
but just, keep in mind there's digital art, which can mean it was created anyway whatsoever. We have no idea how the digital art was created. You don't know unless you ask the artist. And then there's digital painting, which I think the way most people use digital painting is to differentiate between, say, photo manipulation, collage work, 3D modeling. Digital painting, they mean that they painted it with their hands. So I know of no other way to paint. But okay. So then before we wrap up this episode, so that's like everybody listening, that's your homework then, is that if you have a computer with the tools, if you have say a graphics tablet, I suppose there's not a lot of point in trying to paint digitally without a graphics tablet.
There's like one insane person that I know that still uses a mouse, but they're crazy.
I don't know how that's like trying to write your name with a block of wood. Like, how do you do that?
Physically bad for you. You'll destroy the tendons in your hands.
Yeah.
You have for your career's longevity.
Okay.
The most ergonomic thing.
Yeah.
And it should be a pen tablet with the incline, and you take the steps, because if you have to have wrist surgery because of carpal tunnel or something, and it doesn't go well, you're done.
Yeah. But anybody who has a tablet, that's your homework. Okay. If you're dabbling in digital painting, go to Corel Painter's website and download the trial and just try it out. Just open yourself a new document. And first, don't try to paint a still life that's sitting on your desk, okay? Just open a new document, go through every single one of the different brush categories. There's a ton of them, and go through every brush in each category and just play, especially with the watercolors.
Just paper textures that are different too. Be occupied for quite some time.
Just play and see what you can do. I mean, the texture options alone. I mean, there are people that use Corel Painter to just create like fabric and different textures that they sell in, digital packets, like for scrapbooking and stuff, I do it. I sit and just create, amazing textures that I then just keep in a folder and use in a picture later. So just go and play. And we definitely Would love to hear your thoughts. If you go to art-share.org, you can ask us questions and give us feedback. If you look for Art Share Podcast on Facebook, you can find us there, and let us know your thoughts and what you want us to talk about next. Until next time, bye.